Greta Voss had learned to fold herself into a room as though apologizing for existing, and it had become such second nature that she did not notice when Quinton Foster watched her duck through his standard doorway, shoulders curving inward, even though the frame cleared her head by 4 full inches. He was perched on a sawhorse in the shell of what would become the Fletcher family's new farmhouse, sketching measurements on a scrap of pine. When she arrived that first morning with her toolbox and the carefully neutral expression she wore like armor, the autumn air smelled of fresh-cut lumber and wood smoke from the Fletchers' temporary camp. Greta set her box down near the hearth stones and immediately moved to the corner farthest from where the men were working, making herself a shadow. Quinton had built houses across 3 territories and could read people as clearly as he read grain in oak. He saw how she angled her body to take up less space, how she kept her green hands tucked close, how she studied the floor joists with her head tilted down even though any carpenter worth their salt would need to look up. She was maybe 5'8", generously curved in a way that spoke of good cooking and a body that had borne children, and she moved through the world as if trying to disappear. "Mistress Voss," he called, hopping down. "Quinton Foster. They tell me you are the finest Finnish carpenter in the valley." She glanced up, startled, and her dark eyes flicked to his face for only a moment before dropping away. "I do adequate work, sir." "Then I am in trouble because I asked for the finest, not adequate." He grinned, easy and warm. "The Fletchers want built-in cupboards in the kitchen and a carved mantel. Think you can manage?" "Yes, sir." Her voice was quiet, carefully measured. "Quinton," he corrected, "and I mean it about your reputation. Jacob Fletcher bragged on your work for 10 minutes straight, and Jacob does not brag on anyone." The tiniest smile ghosted across her face, and then it was gone. She nodded once and turned to examine the walls where the kitchen would be framed in. Quinton watched her produce, a measuring tape and a stub of pencil, watched her crouch to make herself smaller even in the wide open space of the unfinished room. Over the next week, the house took shape around them. Quinton worked with a crew of 3 other men, raising walls and setting rafters, while Greta came in behind to measure and plan her finish work. She was good, better than good. He saw the precision in her sketches, the clever joinery she proposed for the cupboard frames. But he also saw how she ate her lunch outside alone, sitting on the far side of the lumber pile, how she flinched when one of the other workers laughed too loud, how she folded her tall frame into a crouch whenever she paused to think, as if standing upright invited trouble. On the 8th day, Quinton brought 2 sandwiches and sat down beside her at lunch without asking permission. She looked at him with something like alarm. "My sister made extra," he said, which was a lie. He had made both himself that morning. "She will have my hide if I waste food." Greta accepted the sandwich with careful hands. "Thank you." They ate in silence for a while, watching the clouds move across the valley. Finally, Quinton said, "How long have you been doing Finnish work?" 12 years. "My husband taught me the trade." "The Fletchers mentioned you are widowed." "I am sorry." Her jaw tightened. "It was 3 years ago." There was a story there Quinton could tell, and not a happy one. He did not push. Instead he said, "Well, he taught you well. That joint you proposed for the mantel shelf is smart as anything. I might steal the idea for my next project." This time the smile lasted a fraction longer. "You are welcome to it." When they went back to work, Quinton found himself studying her when she was absorbed in her tasks and would not notice. How she had to duck beneath the beam he had set at 7 feet, even though she was nowhere near that tall. How she turned sideways to pass through doorways that could easily accommodate her. How she sat on an upturned crate instead of the bench he had built at standard height, as though she did not trust the bench to hold her, or did not trust herself to deserve it. That afternoon, he quietly took new measurements, writing them in the margin of his plans where no one else would see. 2 weeks into the project, the Fletcher's house had walls and a roof and windows that let in the slanting autumn light. Quinton began framing the interior spaces, and Greta started the delicate work of cutting and fitting the kitchen cupboards. She worked with a focus that was almost meditative, her strong hands guiding the plane in long, smooth strokes, and Quinton found excuses to be in the same room more often than was strictly necessary. "How many houses have you built?" she asked him one afternoon, surprising him. She rarely spoke first. 43, he said. 44 if you count the barn I converted for my sister and her husband. That is a great many. I like the work. Every family is different, every house is different. You get to solve new puzzles each time. He fitted a window casing into place, checking it with his level. "What about you? How many kitchens have you finished?" "I have lost count." She ran her fingers along the edge of a door she was planing, testing for smoothness. "More than 50, I think. Do you have a favorite?" She paused, considering. "There was a schoolhouse 5 years back. They hired me to build the desks and shelves. All the children would come watch and ask questions. It was—" She trailed off and something sad crossed her face. "It was what?" "Noisy," she said, but gently, as if the memory were precious. "I have 2 children, a boy and a girl. They were younger then. They came with me sometimes." "How old are they now?" "Bruno is 10 and Marta is 8. They must be proud of their mother's skill." Greta's hand stilled on the wood. "Their grandmother tells them I work because I have to, not because I am skilled. She says it is unnatural for a woman to do a man's trade." Quinton heard the edge beneath her careful tone, the old wound that had not healed. "Well," he said, "their grandmother is wrong." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw something vulnerable and hopeful in her eyes before she tucked it away and bent back to her work. The next morning when Greta arrived, she stopped in the doorway of the main room and stared. Quinton was on a ladder, fitting a beam into place, and he glanced down at her frozen figure. "Something wrong, the ceiling," she said slowly. "It is taller." 9 feet in the common rooms, Quinton said, as if this were perfectly ordinary. "Mistress Fletcher mentioned she wanted the house to feel open. Good light, you know." Greta walked into the center of the room and looked up. For the first time since he had met her, her shoulders were not curled inward. "It is very tall." "Is it?" Quinton descended the ladder and stood beside her, pretending to assess his own work. "Seems about right to me." She turned to look at him, and he saw that she knew, that she understood what he had done and why. Color darkened her green cheeks. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Finally she said, "You did not have to do that." "Do what?" He smiled at her, warm and easy. "I am just building a house." But they both knew better. Over the following days, Quinton continued his quiet adjustments. He built the kitchen table with legs 2 inches longer than standard. He set the lintels higher. He framed the pantry doorway tall and wide. And Greta, slowly, began to unfold. It was not a sudden transformation. She did not stride through doorways or throw her shoulders back all at once. But Quinton noticed she stopped ducking beneath beams that cleared her by a foot. She sat on the bench instead of the crate. When she stood at the work table to fit a cupboard hinge, her spine was straight instead of curved, and she smiled more. Real smiles that reached her eyes and softened the careful angles of her face. "You are a strange man, Quinton Foster," she said to him one afternoon when they were both working on the mantel, her carving the decorative surround while he fitted the shelf. "How so?" "You whistle while you work. You joke with everyone. You act as though building houses is the greatest joy in the world." "It is one of them," he said. "There is satisfaction in making something that will stand for generations, something that keeps people warm and safe." He glanced at her. You must feel the same about your work." "I used to," she said quietly. "Before." "Before what?" She was silent for a long moment, and he thought she would not answer. Then she said, "My husband died in an accident at a mill. A beam fell. His family blamed me because I was there that day, because I had asked him to help me move some lumber I had purchased." Her hands kept working, the small gouge biting clean curls from the wood. "They said if I had been home where I belonged, he would still be alive. They said I was unnatural, that I cared more for my work than my family. After he died, they told me I should be grateful they let me keep my children at all, that an orc woman with calloused hands and sawdust in her hair had no business raising human children." Quinton felt a flash of anger so sharp it surprised him. "Your children are human." "Yes, their father was human. I am the only orc in the valley." She finished one curve and started another, her movements precise despite the tremor he heard in her voice. "His family made it clear that I keep my children only by their sufferance, that if I step out of line, if I draw attention, if I do anything they deem improper, they will petition the magistrate to take Bruno and Marta from me." "That is why you make yourself small," Quinton said. "Yes." She set down her tools and looked at him directly. "So you see, Quinton Foster, your kindness is dangerous. If they hear that I am working closely with a human man, if they decide that it is scandalous, they will use it against me." "Then we will make sure there is nothing scandalous to report," Quinton said. "I will not let anyone hurt you or your children, Greta." She studied his face, searching for something. "You barely know me. I know you are skilled and hardworking. I know you love your children. I know you have been treated unjustly." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and covered her hand with his. "And I know that I would like to know you better if you will let me." Her breath caught. Her fingers, rough from years of work, turned beneath his and gripped tight. "I would like that too," she whispered. They finished the Fletcher's house 3 weeks later. It was a beauty, everyone agreed, with its tall ceilings and fine finish work. The cupboards fit so perfectly they seemed to have grown from the walls themselves. The mantel was a work of art, carved with wheat sheaves and autumn leaves. At the housewarming celebration, Mistress Fletcher hugged Greta and declared she would recommend her to every family in the valley. Quinton caught Greta's eye across the crowded room and raised his cup to her. She smiled, and it was like sunrise. After that day, they found reasons to see each other. Quinton would stop by her small cottage at the edge of town, ostensibly to discuss a project but really just to talk. Greta would bring him sketches for a difficult joint, staying for tea and conversation. He met Bruno and Marta, 2 bright-eyed children who looked at their mother with uncomplicated adoration and who pelted Quinton with questions about every house he had ever built. "You always make the ceilings high?" Bruno asked. "Only when they need to be," Quinton said, glancing at Greta. She blushed and busied herself with slicing bread. Winter came, and with it fewer building projects. Quinton took commissions for furniture and small repairs, working from the shed behind his sister's house. Greta did the same. They fell into an easy pattern of companionship that deepened into something more. Quinton found himself thinking about her at odd moments, the way she tilted her head when she was considering a problem, the rare, full laugh that transformed her whole face. And Greta, who had spent 3 years making herself invisible, found herself standing straighter when Quinton was near, as if his presence gave her permission to take up space. It was in January, during a cold snap that frosted the windows and made breath steam, that Quinton asked her to help him with a project. "What sort of project?" she asked. They were in her cottage, sitting at her small kitchen table while the children did lessons by the fire. "A house," he said. "For me?" She looked up, startled. "You are building your own house?" I have been living with my sister and her family for 5 years. It is time." He leaned forward, his eyes intent on hers. "I want to do it right. I want someone with a good eye to help me plan it. Someone who understands how a house should feel, not just how it should stand. Quinton, I do finish work, not framing, I know. But you understand space and proportion. You understand what makes a room welcoming." He paused. "And I trust you." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "When do we start?" They spent the deep winter months planning. Quinton had purchased land on a rise overlooking the valley, with good sun and a spring-fed creek. Together they sketched and revised, argued pleasantly over window placement and chimney design. Greta suggested a workshop attached to the house so he would not have to work in the weather. Quinton drew in a separate small room that could be a study or a child's bedroom, and Greta's pencil stilled over the plans. "Quinton," she said carefully, "why are you building this house?" "Because I need a place to live." "That is not what I mean." He set down his own pencil and took her hands. They were in his sister's kitchen, alone for the moment, and the winter sun slanted through the window and turned Greta's green skin to bronze. "I am building this house," he said, "because I want a life that includes you, because I want to court you properly, not in secret or in shame, but openly. Because I want a home that is worthy of you, where you never have to make yourself small." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "His family will fight this. They will say I am corrupting you. They will try to take my children. Then we will fight back. You are not alone anymore, Greta." She kissed him then, swift and desperate, and he pulled her close and held her as she shook. The thaw came in March, and with it the start of building season. Quinton hired a crew and broke ground on his house. Greta came every day, bringing Bruno and Marta when they were not in school. The children ran wild over the property, exploring the woods and wading in the creek, while their mother and Quinton worked. The house rose beam by beam. Quinton's crew were good men who respected Greta's skill, and accepted Quinton's casual mention that he was courting her with the easy shrugs of people who had better things to worry about than gossip. The walls went up, the roof went on, and the house began to take shape. It was beautiful. Quinton built it with 9-foot ceilings throughout and doorways that stood 7.5 feet tall. He built a wide front door that welcomed rather than constrained. He framed windows that flooded the rooms with light. And Greta, working on the interior finish, felt something tight and old in her chest begin to loosen. She was measuring for the kitchen cupboards on a bright April morning when the riders came up the lane. Greta knew them instantly. Her former father-in-law, Marcus Thorne, rode in front, his face set in grim lines. Behind him were his 2 elder sons and his wife, Clara. They reined in before the half-finished house and dismounted. "Greta," Marcus said coldly, "we need to speak with you." Quinton emerged from the house, wiping sawdust from his hands. "Mr. Thorne, what brings you out this way? This does not concern you, builder." "It concerns me very much, seeing as this is my property and Greta is my guest." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "So the rumors are true. You are living in sin with this orc, corrupting her further." "We are building a house," Quinton said evenly. "Greta is working as my Finnish carpenter. And is it standard practice for a carpenter's children to run wild on a building site?" Clara spoke for the first time, her voice sharp with disdain. "We saw them down by the creek, filthy and unsupervised. They are children playing," Greta said. Her voice was low but steady. "They are safe. They are being neglected while you chase after a man like a common whore," Marcus spat. Quinton took a step forward, his easy demeanor gone. "You will not speak to her that way." "I will speak truth. This orc has disgraced our son's memory, abandoned her duties as a mother, and now flaunts herself with a human man. We have filed a petition with the magistrate to assume guardianship of our grandchildren. They will be raised properly, in a decent home, away from her corrupting influence. Greta felt the ground tilt beneath her. This was her nightmare made real, the threat that had kept her small and silent for 3 years. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out, and then Quinton's hand found hers, warm and solid. "No," he said. Marcus laughed bitterly. "You have no say in this, builder." "Perhaps not. But the law does." Quinton's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "Greta is a respected tradeswoman with a spotless reputation. She owns her home free and clear. She supports her children through honest work. She has never been accused of neglect or abuse by anyone except you, and your accusations are motivated by prejudice and spite." "She is an orc living alone with a human man," Clara hissed. "That is scandal enough." "She is a carpenter working on a commission," Quinton corrected. "As are the 3 men inside the house right now. Should we ask if their wives are scandalized?" He gestured toward the crew, who had emerged to watch the confrontation. "These men work alongside Greta every day. Shall we hear what they think of her character?" "We think she is a damned fine carpenter," called Jacob Fletcher, who had come to help with the raising, "and a better mother than most." "Aye," added another man. "My wife hired her to build our daughter's hope chest. Beautiful work, and she was kind to the girl besides." Marcus's face darkened. "The magistrate will hear our petition regardless." "Then let him hear it," Greta said suddenly. Her voice was stronger now, and she stepped forward, pulling her hand from Quinton's so she could stand on her own. "Let the magistrate hear how you blamed me for your son's death, when it was an accident witnessed by a dozen men. Let him hear how you have held my children hostage to my good behavior for 3 years, how you taught me to shrink and hide and apologize for existing." She drew herself up to her full height, and her eyes blazed. "I am done being small for you," Clara's lip curled. "You think you can fight us. You are nothing, an orc widow with calloused hands." "She is a master carpenter," Quinton said quietly. "She is a devoted mother. She is the woman I intend to marry if she will have me, and she is not alone." The silence that followed was absolute. Greta turned to stare at Quinton, her heart pounding so hard she thought it would break through her ribs. "Mary," Marcus sputtered, "you cannot be serious, entirely serious." Quinton kept his eyes on Greta. "I had planned to ask more romantically, but it seems circumstances have forced my hand." He smiled, that warm, easy smile she had come to love. "Greta Voss, will you marry me? Will you let me build you a home with ceilings you never need to duck beneath? And will you fill it with your children and your laughter and your beautiful work?" She could not breathe, could not think, could only feel the weight of 3 years lifting from her shoulders like a physical thing. "Yes," she whispered. Then, louder, "Yes." Quinton closed the distance between them and kissed her in front of Marcus Thorne and his family, in front of the crew, in front of God and the spring sky. It was a claiming and a promise and a declaration. When they broke apart, Marcus was shaking with rage. "This proves everything. The magistrate will never allow this." "The magistrate," said a dry voice from the lane, "will hear all sides before making a decision." Everyone turned. A gray-haired man on a serviceable horse rode up, his clerk behind him. He dismounted and dusted off his coat. "Magistrate Hollis," Marcus said, recovering quickly. "I am glad you came. You can see for yourself the unseemly behavior." "I see a proposal of marriage," Magistrate Hollis said. "Hardly unseemly." He looked at Greta. "Mistress Voss, I received Mr. Thorne's petition last week. I have spent the time since making inquiries about your character and fitness as a mother. I have spoken to your neighbors, to families who have hired you, to the schoolmaster who teaches your children." He paused. "Every single person spoke of you with respect and warmth. Several were outraged that your fitness was being questioned at all." Greta felt tears prick her eyes. "They did." They did. Mistress Fletcher was particularly vocal. He turned to Marcus. Mr. Thorne, I understand you have grieved your son deeply, but grief does not give you the right to persecute his widow. Your petition is denied. Marcus's face went purple. This is an outrage. She is an orc. She is unnatural. She is a citizen under the law's protection, the magistrate interrupted. As are her children. If you make another attempt to separate them without genuine cause, I will consider it harassment and respond accordingly. He nodded to Quinton. Mr. Foster, I understand congratulations are in order. I wish you both very happy. He remounted and rode away, his clerk trailing behind. The Thorns stood frozen for a long moment, then Marcus jerked his horse's head around and spurred away. His family followed, leaving only the sound of hoofbeats fading down the lane. Greta stood trembling, hardly able to believe what had just happened. Then Bruno and Marta came pelting up from the creek, soaking wet and laughing, and stopped short when they saw the tears on her face. "Mama, what is wrong?" Marta cried. "Nothing is wrong," Greta said, sinking to her knees and pulling them both close. "Everything is right. Everything is finally right." That evening, after the crew had gone home and the children were exploring the unfinished house, Quinton found Greta standing in what would be the great room. The walls were framed but not yet closed, and the setting sun poured through, painting everything gold. "I am sorry I proposed like that," he said, coming to stand beside her. "You deserved better." "It was perfect," she said. She turned to face him. "Did you mean it? Do you truly want to marry me more than anything?" He cupped her face in his hands. "I have been building this house for you from the first beam, Greta. I want you to walk through these doors without ducking. I want you to stand at your full height and take up all the space you deserve. I want to spend my life making sure you never feel small again." She kissed him then, slow and sweet, and felt the last of her armor fall away. They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church, with Bruno and Marta as witnesses and half the valley in attendance. The Thorns did not come, but Greta found she did not care. She wore a dress the color of late summer wheat and stood straight-backed beside Quinton as they spoke their vows. By autumn, the house was finished. It stood proud on its rise, with walls of honey-colored wood and windows that caught the light. Inside, every room was built to generous proportions. The ceiling soared. The doorways welcomed. The kitchen, where Greta hung her tools on hooks Quinton had mounted at exactly the right height, was flooded with morning sun. On the day they moved in, Quinton carried her over the threshold and then set her down in the center of the great room. Greta stood with her head tilted back, looking up at the ceiling 9 feet above her, and felt her heart swell until it ached. "It is so tall," she said wonderingly. "It is exactly right," Quinton said. That night they held a housewarming, and the great room filled with neighbors and friends. Someone brought a fiddle, and someone else produced a flute, and before long there was dancing. Quinton pulled Greta into the center of the room and spun her through the steps of a country reel. She danced without thinking about the ceiling, without hunching her shoulders, without making herself small. She threw her head back and laughed as Quinton twirled her, and when the dance ended, she was breathless and grinning. Bruno and Marta danced too, clumsy and enthusiastic, and the house rang with music and joy. Later, when the guests had gone and the children were asleep in their new rooms, Greta and Quinton stood on the porch and looked out at the valley. The autumn stars burned cold and bright overhead. "Thank you," Greta said quietly. "For what? For building me a house with high ceilings, for seeing me when I was trying to be invisible, for making me believe I deserved to take up space." She leaned into him and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "You always deserved it," Quinton said. "I just gave you the room to remember." They stood together in the doorway of their home, neither ducking nor folding themselves away, and watched the night settle over the land they would tend together. Inside, the house waited with its tall walls and generous spaces, every beam and joint a promise kept, every doorway an invitation to walk through upright and unafraid. Greta had spent 3 years making herself small, but she would never be small again. She had a home built to her measure, children who loved her fiercely, and a man who saw her true size and built his life to match. The great room stood ready for all the years to come, for all the meals and celebrations and ordinary evenings that would fill it. The ceilings would not press down. The walls would not constrain. She was home and she was whole, and she had finally learned to stand tall,